Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Today we will be covering Habit 5 in our 7 Habits of Highly Effective Teens book. And this habit is actually one of my favorites. It is Habit 5, Seek first to understand, then to be understood. Now, this is kind of the longest title that we've seen out of all of our different habits. And this one is kind of one of the more complex ones as well. It has a lot to do with our interpersonal relationships, which we started looking at in Habit 4 when we did some of our problem solving activities. But now what we're going to do, instead of just looking to solve a problem, right, thinking win-win, we're going to try to kind of dive into other people's perspectives and walk around in their shoes a little bit. And that's the real message of this habit. So let's dive right in. So we're going to start off by doing a quick write. I want you to think about what this quote means. Write down some of your initial reactions and then maybe what you think it means after thinking about it for a little bit. So I'll read the quote out loud for us now. The quote is, "People don't care how much you know until they know how much you care." I'll read it one more time for everybody. People don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And that's a little bit of almost like a tongue twister. It's kind of like a mirrored quote, it's a little bit backwards. But I want you to think about the quote. What was your first reaction to this quote? And then kind of dive into the words. What do you think that it is trying to get across? And what does it mean to you? So you're going to go ahead right now and respond in the Google form. You can pause this video. Please make sure you're responding in complete sentences in the Google form. I will be running through and checking through all of these to make sure you're responding in complete sentences in order to get full credit for this activity. So go ahead and pause the video now and complete that activity. All right, so hopefully you were able to think about that quote a little bit. And what that quote really means to me is that people don't really care about what you have to tell them unless they know that you, or unless, sorry, they know that you care about them, right? They mean something to you, and then they'll care what you have to say. So thinking about how we show others how much we care about them, and even if we don't, care about them in a way of like a brother, a sister, a friend, at least showing them empathy and showing them respect so you care and so they know that you care enough to listen. So let's brainstorm right now. You don't have to respond to these questions in the Google form necessarily, but I do want you to take a minute and think about them so you can do kind of our hands off the keyboard, sit back, close our eyes, and think about the answers to these questions. So let's brainstorm number 1. How do you show others that you care about them? Sit back, we're going to close our eyes and think about the answer to that question. Try and think of at least 1 or 2 ways or 1 or 2 situations in which you have tried to show others you care about them. All right, so number 2, how do others show you that they care about you? So what are some times when you have felt really appreciated or really seen or cared for? Maybe somebody did something for you, said something to you that really made you feel good about yourself and made you feel like they care about you. So go ahead and think about maybe 2 or 3 things, 2 or 3 times when this has happened to you. All right, moving on then to number 3. The third one says, how do you feel when someone does not listen to you? How do you feel when someone does not listen to you? And you can even change this a little bit, right? How do you feel when you don't feel heard? Maybe, they're listening, but they don't really hear or understand you. So how do you feel when someone doesn't listen to you or when you don't feel heard or understood? How does that feel? What does that make you feel? And even maybe where do you feel that feeling? So kind of where in your body do you feel that feeling? Go ahead and think about that now. And lastly, number 4, what are the signs of a poor listener, right? So what does it mean to be a bad listener, or someone who's just not a very good listener, maybe? What are the signs? So thinking about that in your head, maybe you want to picture someone or just picture anybody really, or maybe picture yourself. What would be some signs that you aren't listening, right? What are the things you do when you know you aren't listening to somebody? Or maybe when, you have suspected that somebody isn't listening to you, what were the things that they were doing that made you think that? And then lastly, I want you to kind of add on to that. Do you think you're a good listener? Maybe not all of the time, but most of the time, would you consider yourself to be a good listener? Think about that question for a couple seconds. All right, and then we're going to move on. Hopefully, you got a good chance to kind of reflect there because that's going to help you as we move on with this activity. So, moving on, in the book, it talks about the deepest need of the human heart. And the deepest need in all hearts of all people is to be understood, according to our book. So, being understood really takes a lot of meaning, right? This means not only being listened to, but emotionally understood, right? Physically understood. Understanding is a deeper meaning than just, listening and hearing someone. It's almost that feeling of empathy, right? That somebody feels what you're feeling, or that they completely are aware of what's going on in your life or what the thing you're trying to tell them. So being understood is really important. And I want you right now to think of a situation when someone didn't take the time to understand or listen to you, right? Were you open to listen to what they had to say, right? So if someone isn't understanding or listening, or you suspect that they're not understanding you or suspect that they're not listening to you, and then maybe they respond to you, are you prone to listen to their response, right? Are you going to be open to listen to their response? Why or why not? So you're going to respond in this section of the Google form. So you should be in the next section now. So if you didn't click on already, go ahead and click on to the next section. And you're going to respond to these questions in the Google form about what did it feel like, or what maybe would you think it feels like to not be listened to or to not be understood. So you can go ahead and pause the video now and complete this section. So hopefully you're able to reflect a little bit on what it felt like when somebody wasn't listening to you. And maybe what they were doing was employing one of these 5 poor listening styles. So the book talks about each of these styles that we can kind of use to classify a poor listener. So you may have seen a couple of these maybe in that situation that you were just describing. But I am almost willing to bet that everybody has seen or done one of these in their life, right? So you've either experienced somebody who has had one of these poor listening styles, or maybe you have one of these poor listening styles, right? It's not necessarily a bad thing. We all do this, right? It's very human to be maybe a little bit more self-centered or spacing out, or not listening as well as we should or we could. So let's look into these, and maybe that'll help us identify when other people aren't listening, but maybe when we aren't doing it as well. So the first one is called spacing out. And I know that if you have been in Abington Junior High School, that you have spaced out at one point in your life. This is when your mind starts wandering off. Maybe you start staring at the clock, you're staring out the window, you're staring at your fingernails, the floor. Your mind wanders and you are absolutely just consumed by your own thoughts, right? That's when you're kind of jumping into another universe, even though you happen to be sitting in the classroom. But this happens when we're listening as well. People will be talking to us, and all of a sudden you're like, oh my goodness, I'm so sorry, I completely spaced. So spacing out maybe is unintentional, but it is a result of us not actively listening and taking the time to really invest our attention in someone. Even if it isn't intentional, it can still be really hurtful. So that's one style of poor listening. Number 2 is pretend listening. And this one is a little bit more intentional, a little bit more active than just spacing out. This is when you actively act like you're listening, right? You do the things with where you nod your head and you go, yeah, 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 cool, sounds great. That's really interesting, is when I hear people say a lot. You say, oh, that's super cool, even though you're not really listening at all, even though it might not relate to what that person is saying at all. So this is kind of a dangerous one because if you say something, right, you pretend you're listening and you say something to that person that maybe you didn't mean or you weren't paying attention or that doesn't even make sense, they're going to be very aware that you weren't listening, and that can be really hurtful. So again, even though you might just be preoccupied or busy or stressed about something, this can still be really hurtful and even kind of damaging. Number 3 is selective listening. This is one that is kind of unintentional, but this one can definitely be hurtful as well. This is where you only pay attention to the conversation that the part of the conversation, excuse me, that interests you. So imagine you're, talking to somebody about school or something, one of their problems, or somebody's talking about their partner, their girlfriend, their boyfriend, their friend, whatever it is. And all of a sudden they start talking about, fun weekend plans, and you jump right in. You're like, oh, yeah, what are we doing this weekend? That's definitely selective listening, right? You jump into the conversation at the part that is interesting or relevant to you. And that can make the other person feel obviously like you don't care about them or you don't care about their problems. And even if you don't, right, even if that's not something that really particularly interests you, it's still polite, it's still kind to listen and engage in what that person is saying, or maybe just steering the conversation away, right? Not just showing interest in the part that pertains to you. Number 4 is called word listening. And this is when we find that we're maybe a little bit preoccupied. So you're paying attention to the words that they're saying, but maybe you're doing something else, right? You're not in tune to the emotions, the body language, the tone of voice. So in this type of poor listening, it's really easy to misunderstand what people are saying or to kind of disengage. So I see this a lot when people are texting or maybe reading, emails or, doing anything else while somebody is talking to you, right? You're hearing the words, you're processing them, but your brain is not fully engaged in that person or what they're saying. They're not in tune to the emotions or their body language, which is so much of listening that you're not really fully understanding the meaning. Lastly, we have number 5, self-centered listening. And this one I think is one of the most common. It's you're listening and you are doing everything right, but except from actually understanding this person, you are taking everything into kind of your own paradigm, right? Your own set of understanding. So you're listening, you're seeing everything from your own point of view. So instead of fully understanding and engaging with that person's emotions, you're saying, I know exactly how you feel. And then you jump into your own story. So it's almost listening, but what that person ends up feeling like a lot of the time is that person just feels like you've taken that opportunity to talk about yourself and your problems instead of really focusing on them, right? It shifts the focus of the conversation, which is the hurtful part of that poor listening style. So, moving on, what we're going to do is we're going to do some practice to identify some of these poor listening styles. You can pause this and keep this diagram on the screen to refer back to, and you're going to respond in the Google form and read 5 different scenarios. So there will be one of these poor listening styles per question, right? No, there are not more than one possible answer for each of the questions, and each one of these will be used one time. There are no repeats, so hopefully that should help you a little bit. So you're going to figure out which scenario pertains to which poor listening style in the Google form. Go ahead and pause the video and complete that activity now. So now that we've talked about our poor listening styles, right, how to identify these are the habits that really kind of spring forth from those bad listening styles, right? These are habits that we can develop when we have conversations with people or when we're talking to people that can really create poor experiences between two people or between multiple people. So the first one is judging, right? You're making judgments about them, right? You're thinking in your head and you're kind of 2 steps ahead of the conversation. So while you're making all of these judgments about this person or their situation or thinking about what you would do, you're not really listening, you're just judging, right? You're thinking 2 steps ahead and you're not being present in the conversation. So that's definitely a bad habit. Number 2 is advising. So this is the when I was your age, right? That makes you feel so small if you've had maybe an adult say that to you, right? When I was your age, we had to walk 5 miles uphill both ways in the snow, right? All of those kind of, maybe funny examples. But when you give advice from your own experience, you're negating what the other person has said to you. So even though you feel like you're empathizing, they feel like you're not focusing on them. And this one I will share is something that I even struggle with all the time. This is a really, really common one that people do with the best of intentions, but it always doesn't always yield the best results. Number three is probing. So probing happens when you're trying to engage and you're asking the person questions, but what you're really doing is being nosy. So you're trying to dig up emotions before this person is ready to share them. So being probed is where somebody will dig deeper and deeper and deeper. And even if the person feels uncomfortable or uses their body language or even their words to communicate that they don't want to share, this person will continue to ask or continue to kind of like pick at this person's story or their emotions. So again, this can, come from a really good place. You can say, oh, I was just asking you questions. I was just trying to understand. But what the other person will feel like is that you are trying to dig too far into their business, or you're just making them uncomfortable. So definitely something we want to be careful of in the future. So these three listening habits are something that I really would like everybody to be cognizant of, maybe throughout the next week. Just kind of think when you're talking to people, am I judging, am I advising, or am I probing? Okay, so you can kind of think about those three different habits, as well as the different listening styles, and try and judge, right? Am I doing one of these things? Am I, being a good listener, or am I falling susceptible to one of these habits or bad listening styles? So this is where genuine listening comes in. So genuine listening is something that's really hard. It's a skill that we all have to develop, because sometimes it's not in our human nature to listen genuinely, right? So a lot of times we're preoccupied by our own problems, our own stresses, something else going on, even our phones. Genuine listening is really hard and it takes a lot of practice. So I'd like you right now to look at the diagram on the left here. We have a pie chart representing what genuine listening actually looks like. So genuine listening, as you can see, is over half just body language, right? So the body language of a genuine listener would be sitting up straight, looking at the person, right? If you're standing or sitting, maybe you're sitting with them, maybe you're standing next to them, whatever it is, but turning yourself toward them to show that you're physically engaged with that person, right? That, turning your shoulders towards somebody, something as simple as that, just shows that you're listening and you're open to them. It's also maybe nodding. So when somebody's talking to you, nodding or shaking your head to kind of agree with what they're saying, or to at least show that you understand what they're trying to get across. Maybe, even if it's somebody that or somebody that you're comfortable with and that they're comfortable with it, maybe, holding their hand or putting your hand on their shoulder. Obviously, that's something that you would have to clear with that person, and make sure that they're okay with it. Ask if, is it okay? But that's something that can definitely show genuine listening to somebody when you're engaging with them. 40% of it really comes from tone or feeling. So even facial expression at that point can kind of go into your tone. But the tone is a lot of the times the way you respond, right? So the words that you're saying in that 7%, tiny little slice up at the top, the words that you say, the way that you say them can really convey a lot. So saying, oh, I'm sorry is so, so different than saying, oh, I'm so sorry, right? You can even hear the difference in what I'm saying right there as a kind of a silly example, but the feeling and the tone in your voice can really convey a lot as to whether you were actually listening and engaging with that person. So the way the book that really phrases this is thinking like a mirror. So this phrase of mirroring, right, the skill of mirroring, it means that you're not judging, you're not giving advice, you're just reflecting back what that person is saying to you and what they're feeling. So repeating back in your own words what the person is feeling and saying so that they can confirm or deny, just really shows that you've understood what they're saying, like full understanding, right? Understanding with your feelings and understanding with your words. So let's look at some examples of what mirroring can look like, because I know this is a little bit confusing. So mirroring happens with not only your body language, as we just talked about, but it can happen with your words. So these are some sentence stems, right? Some kind of starters to see how can we mirror something back to somebody. So let's say, for example, one of the students in our class comes up to me and says, hey, I'm having a really hard time. I'm stressed out. I have a lot of different tests coming up, and I don't think I'm going to be able to get the classwork done this week. So a way that I could mirror back to that student, instead of just saying, oh, well, why is that happening? I could say, I can see that you're feeling stressed. you feel that you don't have enough time to get the work done this week, and that's okay. So that the student not only, has an answer to what they're saying, but they can see that I have fully listened to what they're saying. I understand that they're stressed, and we have kind of like a mutual understanding that is established. So let's practice using some of these sentence stems, and let's practice coming up with some mirrored responses. So what I would like you to do is you're going to respond in the Google form. There's a bunch of different scenarios, and some of them are kind of silly. But what you're going to do is try and start with one of these sentence stems in order to not solve this person's problem, but just mirror their feelings back to them. Show that you have understood what they're saying. Okay, so there should be a couple of different quotes in the Google form. Pretend like that quote is being said to you by another person, right? Imagine there's somebody standing in front of you saying those words to you, and you're not going to try to solve their problems. You're not going to try and talk about your own experiences, right? We're going to avoid judging. We're going to avoid reflecting. We're going to avoid making it about ourselves. We're just going to mirror their feelings back to them. So you can use these sentence stems if you'd like to, or you can come up with your own mirrored responses, and you're going to go ahead and answer those 5 scenarios in the Google form. Make sure at the bottom that you check that you have answered all of those using a mirrored response, and that should give you the 5 points for that activity. I will be checking to make sure that everyone did actually complete those before giving you the points in Skyward. All right, so once you complete that activity, we are done for this Habit 5 lesson. Very nice job, everyone. The text is linked with this activity on Google Classroom if you would like to read the text for Habit 5. Very nice job, and see you guys for Habit 6.